Shalom,
Shalom.
and welcome to our new moon celebration. A new moon is a new month. This goes, this coming directly behind the Bible study that we had yesterday. Um, this directly fits what Yahweh has set up for our calendar system. And it is important that we go over those things, that we get familiar with them, because if you go out on the internet, you end up finding that there's a lot of different people that say that they are Hebrew Israelites, saying that they are following this culture. And as you start getting into how they do what they do, you find that it does not match up with this word. But many people are already trapped by the time they figure that out, and it is hard for us to backtrack when we get to situations like that. So as we normally do, we go over all of our holy days and go over how to count those holy days, which is what we went through last night. And tonight we're going to go into a little bit more of understanding how those things were put in order. So we're going to first, let's go to First Chronicles 23. Did you get? Okay. And let's start at verse 27.
For by the last words of Dawid, the Levites were numbered from 20 years old and above, because their office was to wait on the sons of Aaron for the service of the house of Yahweh, in the courts and in the chambers, and in the purifying of all holy things, and the work of the service of the house of Elohim.
So what this signified was that a man was responsible for himself at the age of 20. You find that coming out of Egypt, all of the ones that were over that age of 20, the age of war, they were held responsible for their own doings. And when you numbered the children of Israel, these were the ones that had to give an account. So then you find the priests starting at 30, but then they had under priests at 20 who would then help them in the service that they needed to do. Those priests would serve from 30 to 50, and at that point at 50 they were then elders, and then were able to just serve in a advising capacity. There used to be a point that all over America 20 years was retirement. No matter where you worked, if you worked 20 years, you were able to collect retirement. They have constantly pushed that further and further and further back. But this is where these things come from. There's a setup here. And in the beginning, people attempted to try to at least mimic the setup. They don't even try to pretend like they're dealing with it now. Go ahead.
Verse 29. Both for the showbread, and for the fine flour for meat offering, and for the unleavened cakes, and for that which is baked in the pan, and for that which is fried, and for all manner of measure and size, and to stand every morning to thank and praise Yahweh, and likewise at even, and to offer all burnt sacrifices unto Yahweh in the Shabbats, in the new moons, and on the set feasts, by number, according to the order commanded unto them, continually before Yahweh, and that they should keep the charge of the tabernacle of the congregation, and the charge of the holy place, and the charge of the sons of Aaron their brethren, in the service of the house of Yahweh.
All right. Now let's go to Isaiah chapter 66. And verse 23.
It says, chapter 66 and verse 23. And it shall come to pass that from one new moon to another, and from one Shabbat to another, shall all flesh come to worship before me,
Now,
says
this is the
Yahweh.
future kingdom. This is how things are going to be set up. Yet you have a lot of people teaching that these are not things that we are supposed to deal with. This is, normally why we don't find a lot of people dealing with the new moon. But the interesting thing is, people have always dealt with it. They just didn't tell us. Even when we deal with how they counted Easter, we never knew how they counted Easter. When we were going over some things last night, um, um, I think one of the sisters mentioned how we were taught that his day of birth was always December 25th, but the date of his resurrection changed constantly. You could never tell what day Easter was going to be on. But you knew when he was born, but the day that he died somehow kept moving. And none of us really, forced anybody to answer those things. But you'll find that what they did was took the first Sunday that came after this vernal equinox. They did that so that they could keep it in the same season as Passover. So you'll find Easter and Passover always close together, but there's a reason for that. When you look at the graphic that we have here explaining, what's happening, you have the sun bringing forth its light. There's always a part of the moon that is lit constantly. The issue is you can't see that part of the moon that's being lit. So when you see the little blue part on the earth, that represents where we are. The part of the moon that we see is then dark in the new moon because the other side of it is lit. Now, this is the beginning. This is alignment. You see the three things in a line. Yahweh is an Elohim of order. The sun, the moon, and the earth are in one line. That's why the moon is dark. Now, you have Hebrew Israelite congregations that are actually teaching that the opposite is true. They teach that the other end is new moon. So when it's full moon, they're teaching that it's new moon. And what's interesting is they taught this way, according to that graphic, for 10 years, and then up one day and said, this is the way it's going to be. And because they have congregations all over everywhere, now you got thousands of Hebrew Israelites whose everything just changed because a man said so. Now, when you look at these things and you go over this orbit, this graphic really explains a whole lot, and we may end up coming back to that if there's not another one that gives us the same understanding. Let's go to Colossians chapter 2. Colossians chapter 2, and let's read verse 16.
Let no man therefore judge you in meat, or in drink, or in respect of an holy day, or of the new moon, or of the Shabbat days.
Now, of course, we've heard these things before where people read this, but they stopped at certain points so that it gave you a different understanding. Let no man therefore judge you in meat, or in drink, or in respect of an holy day, or of the new moons, or of the Shabbat days. But when you then read behind that, you then see the intent of the writing, which are a shadow of things to come. But when you take those things off, you then have a lot of people who read the New Testament only. They then use that because it was taught to them incorrectly. They say, well, don't judge me about a Sabbath day. Because they have been taught that anybody who says anything to them is then judging them. So having that read without getting that full thought then causes some situations where people can believe that it says something other than what it really says. Let's go to Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1, and let's start this at verse 1.
In the beginning, Elohim created the heaven and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of Elohim moved upon the face of the waters. And Elohim said, let there be light, and there was light. And Elohim saw the light, that it was good, and Elohim divided the light from the darkness. And Elohim called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day.
Right. So there is light and darkness in the first day, but there is not a sun that has been created. This is where some of these groups then get their so-called following of the Sabbath according to the new moon. They start using these things because once we start to get further down, we then see where the sun and the moon was then created. So they say it must have been created in the beginning. No, he was the light in the beginning. And if you get to Revelation, you find that out. It says that there will be no need for the sun nor the moon, for he is their light. So the same thing that he says in the beginning is the same thing that happens in the end. You don't need the sun or the moon when he is there. He is that light. Go ahead.
Verse 6. And Elohim said, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters, and let it divide the waters from the waters. And Elohim made the firmament, and divided the waters which were under the firmament from the waters which were above the firmament. And it was so.
Right. Now, as we look at this graphic, it says, and let the dry land appear. When we push all of the masses of land together, you'll find that they fit together like a puzzle. But do understand, it was Yahweh Elohim that said, man is of one language and as of one people, and this is the evil that man decides to do. It was Yahweh that separated the people and divided them by language. Because he said this so-called togetherness that man has man doing evil. And when we get right down to it, every so-called kingdom that wants to do this one world order, this one government system, they're trying to get right back to the evil thing that he separated in the beginning. Go ahead.
Verse 8. And Elohim called the firmament heaven, and the evening and the morning were the second day.
And of course we know that these are Yahweh's days. There is no dealing as far as man, because man is not even in this equation. So there is no scale for man's day. So between day 1 and day 2 could be 1,000,000 of our years. We're not even in the equation. So we're talking about Yahweh's time. Go ahead.
And Elohim said, let the waters under the heaven be gathered together onto one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. And Elohim called the dry land earth, and the gathering together of the waters called he seas. And Elohim saw that it was good. And Elohim said, let the earth bring forth grass, the herb yielding seed, and the fruit tree yielding fruit after his kind, whose seed is in itself upon the earth. And it was so. And the earth brought forth grass and herb yielding seed after his kind, and the tree yielding fruit, whose seed was in itself after his kind. And Elohim saw that it was good.
Right. And as we talked about last night, these seeds, anything you have these fruits and vegetables, the seed was in it. That seed, if it's planted, would then produce that same fruit or vegetable. These were things that Yahweh provided on the earth. But now we have companies that say that they own those seeds. Go ahead.
And the evening and the morning were the third day. And Elohim said, Let there be lights in the firmament of the heaven to divide the day from the night. And let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years.
Right. And this is how we set up our calendar system. We do not have a lunar calendar. We have a lunar/solar calendar, because it says let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and for years. Go ahead. Read that note there.
8, the moon. The moon has a nearly circular orbit. It takes the moon 27.322 days to go around the earth once. Because of this motion, the moon appears to move about 13 degrees against the stars each day, or about 1/2 degree per hour.
Now, before we get to that, when you talk about these things where it says the seasons, we then have, as the earth rotates around the sun, we have the orbits. That first graphic showed where it showed the ones in alignment. That shows all three of how their orbit impacts each part of our calendar. This part here is dealing with the seasons, which is also dealing with our year. It takes a year for the earth to orbit the sun. As it orbits the sun, you'll notice the two sticks in the top and the bottom, which are the poles. It is showing you how it tilts. As it tilts toward the sun, then those things are going to get warmer. The earth then gets warmer, then there starts to be more growth on the earth. Right down at the bottom, you see vernal equinox, March 20th. Once it crosses this invisible plane where it starts to tilt toward the sun, we then get this growth. This is where Yahweh said this is the beginning of your year. So you have the ending of March to the beginning of April, right in there where you start having this change in seasons. So this is why the people regarded those that followed the book as April Fools, because this is our new year. Whereas the other people are keeping their new year at the other end. You see that winter solstice? Where they have December 21st. Then you start going on. You find that a lot of their holidays that we were given in Christendom are around solstices. They're around sun signs. See, Christmas wasn't always on December 25th. See, a lot of people don't know that. See, these are all about the winter solstice, and they have all of their things. Even when you deal with Easter, this is why they keep saying the sun is risen, and then they have sunrise service. Then you look down here at March 20th, vernal or spring equinox, another sun sign. So they then base their Easter on that, and then have sunrise service to put the exclamation point on it. But we thought they were dealing with the sun, S-O-N. They were dealing with the sun, S-U-N. When the Pope came to Yankee Stadium, he set up everything on the grounds at Yankee Stadium, and when they zoomed out, he was standing in a big ball of fire, which was a sunburst. Why did they go through all the trouble of making a sunburst and have him stand in it? Then he has a staff that is a sunburst. So everybody else knew that they were worshiping the sun, S-U-N. Just nobody bothered to tell us those things. Go to that next graphic. Then you have a little bit more of an explanation, and you see the poles at the bottom as it starts to lean, and you see that the orbit that the Earth follows is not circular; it's oval. So it's not a complete circle, and this also there's a reason why I mentioned that, because you have the people who so-called follow this book of Enoch, and then they make up this calendar that is completely divided in these very square sections. They have, divided it perfectly. The problem is the orbit doesn't work like that. So that whole setup that they have is not correct. Now go to the next graphic. Now start over at that reading right there.
The next one down?
Now go to pick 8.
Okay. The moon has a nearly circular orbit. It takes the moon 27.322 days to go around the Earth once. Because of this motion, the moon appears to move about 13 degrees against the stars each day.
So when you look at on the right, this represents where the sun would be sitting. You then see the Earth lit on that side. But of course, we are on the Earth in the middle. And when you look in the middle, you look straight forward, and all you see is darkness because the other side of the moon is lit. Go ahead.
Or about 1/2 degree per hour. If you watch the moon over the course of several hours one night, you will notice that its position among the stars will change by a few degrees.
So then as you move around this circle, you're going to see different parts of the moon, and you start seeing it gradually being lit more and more as you go toward the left or upward. You then see that it continually grows. That's what waxing, in the first part, it says waxing crescent. Waxing means growing. So then it grows, and then you see the opposite of new moon is full moon. So directly across from the new moon, on the other side, you see full moon, and then it's completely lit. So now you know this is the middle of your month. See, our folks being in those fields, they were able to tell what part of the month they was in by just looking up and seeing the sky. They didn't need a calendar. They didn't need their phones to tell them what part of the month they was in. They can look and tell. Because in the beginning of the month, you're going to see the moon lit on one side, then it's going to go full. Then you're going to see it as you get down on the other side toward the bottom. It says waning gibbous, and then waning crescent. Waning means decreasing. So then it grows on one side, gets completely full, and then starts decreasing. So you're going to see one side lit. Then the next time you're going to see the other side lit, and it's going to keep decreasing until it gets right back to the point of a new moon again, and then the cycle starts over. That's our month. Now remember, as we read in Genesis, it said your days, your seasons, your years. So you got days, seasons, years. So we have this the whole orbit of dealing with this moon that gives us our month. Go ahead, brother. Where you at?
The changing position of the moon with respect to the sun leads to lunar phases. Measuring the motion of the moon around the earth relative to the distant stars leads us to what is called the sidereal period. The sidereal period is the time required for a celestial body within our solar system to complete one revolution with respect to the fixed stars.
Now, when you look at this graphic and you see There's a line that says the Earth's orbit, and you find that the Earth is then moving around that sun. That orbit gives us our year. We then have this orbit of the moon going around the Earth, which gives us our month. And then we have the rotation of the Earth going around. That gives us our day, which completely fits what Yahweh said in Genesis. Your days, your years, your seasons. So we get our days, our months, and our years all from the rotations or the orbits of these things here between the earth, moon, and the sun. Go ahead.
As observed from some fixed point outside the system. The sidereal period of the moon is the time needed for it to return to the same position against the background of stars. The moon appears to move completely around the celestial sphere once in about 27.3 days as observed from the Earth. This is called a sidereal month. It represents the orbital period of the moon around the Earth. Measuring the motion of the moon around the Earth relative to the sun leads us to what is called the synodic period. The synodic period is the time required for a body within the solar system, such as a planet, the moon, or an artificial Earth satellite, to return to the same or approximately the same position relative to the sun as seen by an observer on the Earth.
Right. So as seen by an observer on the Earth, we have to deal with that movement because you have constant movement, so it can't just get back to the same place it started because other things are moving. So once it gets back to its relative place and catches up, then you have this 29.5 days. This is where we get our month. Go ahead.
The moon's synodic period is the time between successive recurrences of the same phase, between full moon and full moon. The moon takes 29.5 days to return to the same point on the celestial sphere as reference to the sun because of the motion of the earth around the sun. This is called a synodic month. Lunar phases are observed from the earth. Lunar phases as observed from the earth are correlated with the synodic month.
All right. And here we have Uriach in the scripture, which is in Strong's H3394. Which means moon. Kodesh means new moon, or by implication, a month. So you have these things that Yahweh has given us, and he's talked about these new moons, which are a new month. Read the next one.
Years. If a year were always considered to be 365 days, the calendar would effectively slip one day forward every 4 years. After 360 years of that system, the calendar would be 90 days off from the true seasons. Winter would end in June rather than in March if a calendar assumed a moon cycle to be 29 or 30 days rather than 29 and a half. It will become 6 days off in 1 year, completely useless.
This is why we cannot have a completely lunar calendar. The people who practice Islam and they keep Ramadan, you'll find that Ramadan doesn't stay in one season. When they keep it, it moves because it's lunar. And anything that is lunar only is going to move throughout the seasons. When you read what Yahweh said about our holy days, they must be kept in their appointed times and their appointed season. So Passover has to be in the spring. It cannot move. So it cannot be just according to the moon itself. You have to use the things that Yahweh has given us. Go ahead.
We're fairly familiar with how the Roman calendar solves the problem of the extra quarter day in the year. Every 4 years, we have a leap year.
Right. So then they have to figure out a way. They know their system is broke. And they tell you that their system is broke. So to fix their system, they just throw something in there. They tell you, look, our system broke. So every now and then, we get too far behind, we just go make some stuff up. And everybody say, okay, let's make it up. They're telling you that their system doesn't work. That's just like saying, man, at the end of the day, I tried to balance my checkbook and the money didn't work. Well, just throw some money in there. Just pencil it in. But don't they do the same thing? When their money run out, what do? We keep hearing the thing. The government is about to run out of money. What they do? Make more. They said, Congress, the government about to run out of money. They make more money. They just throw some numbers in. Yet they've had practice doing this. This is what they do. Go ahead.
Pope Gregory fixed the Julian calendar, which was implemented by Julius Caesar in 1582. He took 10 days out of the calendar that year. October 4th was followed by October 15th that year. Removing these days compensated for all of the unnecessary leap years from the Council of Nicaea till that time.
And when you deal with this Council of Nicaea, you find that they also changed the Sabbath day from Saturday to Sunday in these edicts and all of these things that they made as well. So a whole lot of things were done that our people just won't deal with. And you have very educated people that belong to Sunday churches. A lot of these people have gone to college and they've come across this knowledge, but they came across the knowledge in a different setting. See, if you were in class and you come across, hey, they changed the day of worship from Saturday to Sunday, but you didn't learn it in church, a lot of people won't then take that information and bring it back to church and say, can I ask you a question? Right here in my encyclopedia, it says that the day of worship was changed. How do you reconcile that? So you have a bunch of people sitting there who know that it was changed and it had absolutely nothing to do with the church, but they still partake. Go ahead.
Hence, our present calendar is called Gregorian.
All right, let's go to Exodus chapter 12. Exodus chapter 12, and let's read verses 1 through 3.
And Yahweh spake unto Moshe and Aaron in the land of Egypt, saying, This month shall be unto you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year to you.
Right, this shall be the beginning of your year. And he's not talking about January. Go ahead.
Speak you unto all the congregation of Israel, saying, In the 10th day of this month they shall take to them every man a lamb, according to the house of their fathers, a lamb for an house.
So then we know now this beginning of the year that's supposed to be kept is also the same thing where the Passover is kept. So the Passover is the beginning of the year. Yet they have the beginning of the year in January. See, at some point we have to make a decision who it is we're going to follow. Whether we're going to deal with the dictates of the flesh or whether we're going to deal with the things that Yahweh our Elohim has set up. And every man got a choice. Ain't nobody going to make it for you. You can make it on your own. You do whatever it is you feel like you got to do. But as for me and my house, Exodus 13, and let's start that at verse 1.
And Yahweh spake unto Moshe, saying, Sanctify unto me all the firstborn whatsoever opens the womb among the children of Israel, both of man and of beast, it is mine. And Moshe said unto the people, Remember this day in which you came out from Egypt, out of the house of bondage, for by strength of hand Yahweh brought you out from this place. There shall no leavened bread be eaten. This day came you out in the month of Abib. And it shall be when Yahweh shall bring you into the land of the Canaanites, and the Hittites, and the Amorites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, which he sware unto your fathers to give you, a land flowing with milk and honey, that you shall keep this service in this month. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread, and in the 7th day shall be a feast to Yahweh. Unleavened bread shall be eaten 7 days, and there shall no leavened bread be seen with you, neither shall there be leaven seen with you in all your quarters. And you shall show your son in that day, saying, This is done because of that which Yahweh did unto me when I came forth out of Egypt. And it shall be for a sign unto you upon your hand, and for a memorial between your eyes, that Yahweh's law may be in your mouth, for with a strong hand has Yahweh brought you out of Egypt. You shall therefore keep this ordinance in his season from year to year.
You shall therefore keep this ordinance in his season from year to year. So now we see the beginning of the year is also connected with this Passover, and it is then called Abib, which is green, that is young ear of grain. So we're then connecting this with a particular time of the year. When we deal with January, there's absolutely nothing growing. Ain't nothing green in January. But the evergreen tree, that tree that they worship, the tree that they had us set up in our living room, that's the only thing green. And they set it up. So no matter how many other gifts you had, there were some gifts that was always placed up under the tree. That way you would have to kneel down and bow down to that tree to get that gift. And if you think about it, our parents did the things and they didn't know what it was they were doing. It was certain things you could get, but the other ones, you got to wait until the morning to get that. Kids would stay up at midnight so they can go and get as many gifts as they can play with, see everything. But there were certain ones under that tree. You couldn't touch those. It had to be seen that you bow down to this evergreen tree. And Yahweh says, don't have any of them groves near my altar. That's what the evergreen tree is, a grove. Go ahead, bro.
Verse 10.
All right, jump to pick 19.
As the earth revolves around the sun, there are 2 moments each year when the sun is exactly above the equator. These moments, called equinoxes, occur around March 20th or 21st and September 22nd or 23rd. Equinox literally means equal night, since the length of day and night is nearly equal in all parts of the world during the equinoxes.
So this is where we're dealing with the beginning of our years. We have this where you find this vernal equinox around March 20th or 21st. So this is that beginning where you start to get that tilt. Then you deal with your new moons for your months, and this is why this is our starting point. Go ahead.
The March equinox marks when the northern hemisphere starts to tilt toward the sun, which means longer sun year days. In the northern hemisphere, the March equinox is called the vernal equinox because it signals the beginning of spring.
Vernal means spring. Go ahead.
The September equinox is called the autumnal equinox because it marks the first day of fall.
Now, if you think about it, even now, here shortly, you're going to start seeing a lot of churches that are advertising harvest celebration. See, we let all that stuff slip right beside us. And ain't now one of these folks grown nothing. They get what they celebrate. But you got harvest things that are, you just go down the street and just start paying attention as you're driving down the street. Harvest festival, harvest this. And they start putting out their pumpkins. These things are happening in the church. It never did occur to us that we were taught paganism in the church. Go ahead.
When the northern hemisphere starts to tilt toward the sun in spring, the southern hemisphere starts to tilt away from the sun, signaling the start of fall. Thus, in the southern hemisphere, the March equinox is called the autumnal equinox, and the September equinox is called the vernal equinox. The March equinox signals the beginning of spring in the northern hemisphere and autumn in the southern hemisphere. It marks that special moment when the sun crosses the celestial equator, going from south to north. Our sun rises earlier now, and nightfall comes later.
Now, when you deal with how Yahweh had a day, then you have from even, it said there was darkness, and he said let there be light, and there was light. And you have the way that we even deal with our days from darkness to darkness. So you have, it is dark when it begins one day, then it comes light again, and then it goes back dark. That's the next day. The day doesn't change at 12 o'clock midnight. It changes at sundown, or what we call sundown. This is how Yahweh has the days. So with that set up, every last one of us see the day change, because we see it get dark. If you do it according to man's system, most of us will never see a day change, because we ain't standing up at 12 o'clock midnight. And how would you know if it's 12 o'clock midnight anyway? But you know when it goes from daylight to darkness. That's the changing of a day. And the new moons operate the exact same way. Go ahead.
Plants are sprouting. Winds are softening. For us in the northern hemisphere, people are enjoying the warmer days of spring. Meanwhile, south of the equator, autumn begins.
All right. Now let's read that definition of seasons.
From H3259, properly an appointment, that is, a fixed time or season.
Right, a fixed time or season. So when we start talking about this Passover, it has to be in the same part of the year. And Passover is our beginning feast. Okay? So it starts there. Once you start that one, everything else is going to go in a line. So he's very particular as to when you start the first one, because it is going to dictate everything else. Go ahead. Keep going. No, keep reading it.
Specifically a festival, conventionally a year, by implication an assembly.
Right. So then you have these assemblies, these things where we were then set to gather as a congregation in those appointed times. Go to the definition of a year.
Years, from H8141, Shana, the first form being in plural only, the second form being feminine. From H8138, a year, as a revolution of time.
As revolution of time. I want to go back to, I think that graphic is, it's going to be, I think, the third one. All right, where Isaiah 66 and verse 23. And when you look at this particular graphic, you see the moon, and then there's a arrow. It's showing you the moon's orbit around the earth. This is a month. You see the earth, and then there's a little red arrow. This is the earth rotating in respect to the sun. The sun is sitting there. That rotation You see that the blue part of the earth represents the lit part. Then it's dark on the other side. So we know this is why we have time zones. You got a lot of people who deal with the flat earth, and they call themselves Hebrew Israelite. And they tell you, you go too far, you're going to fall off the edge. I told them, go to the edge and take a picture for me and send it to me. I haven't gotten any replies yet. But you got a lot of flat worlders out there. And they call themselves Hebrews. So this is, and I asked them, so why is it not the same time all over the earth since it's flat? So then you have this rotation. So this gives us our day, the rotation of the earth either toward or away from the sun. That's our day. Then you have this moon that is then orbiting, which is going around the earth. That's our month. Then you have the earth and its own orbiting moon going all the way around the sun. That is our year. That is Yahweh's setup, and his setup is perfect. He didn't need, if Enoch had a calendar, then that makes Elohim his servant. The calendar belongs to Yahweh. So this is why some of the things that we did last night and counting the things, this is why we did that and why we waited to deal with the vernal equinox as our beginning, and then we take the new moon that is after that. So that's all that we're going to do for tonight. Enjoy your new moon. Shalom.
Shalom.